Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson, broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. The topic of the day is regulation. Regulation is coming. It's kind of like winter is coming. Although I hope this one has a more satisfying ending than Game of Thrones. So, Fox News breaking report. Let me read off the tweet for you guys. Exciting tweet. Exciting tweet. It says, according to Chris Gasparino, Joe Biden administration is in early stages of developing a regulatory approach to the booming crypto biz, sources tell Fox Business. We'll discuss with Liz Klallman and what's being kicked around, re-regulation, SEC enforcement activities, and the possibility of a Bitcoin ETF. Okay, so here's the long and the short. There is no reality that a government as regulation friendly as the United States government will allow an industry with a market capitalization of over $1 trillion to be unregulated or to live in this weird gray area of enforcement. The only reason why we haven't already seen comprehensive regulation in the cryptocurrency space is because of the political molasses of the last 5 years, 6 years of Washington. Nothing is getting done. And people have been fighting about everything from healthcare to immigration, and there hasn't been party unity. If we had a different Republican president in 2016, there would have already been regulation. Trump was just an anomaly and had different priorities and focus. And as a consequence, they didn't get around to it. If it was Jeb Bush or someone else, regulations would have been passed in the first 2 years while the Republicans maintained control over the House and the Senate. What does that mean? It means that Biden, as a creature of the swamp, he's been in Washington for over 50 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried. He knows how to pass legislation. And if you look at how he's been approaching things, he's been very systematic. The last stimulus bill, I think, was $1.3 trillion, passed without a hitch. He's negotiating hard with Joe Manchin right now about the infrastructure bill. There's a very good possibility that's going to pass with the $2 trillion he's asking for with some mild concessions. Looks like they'll get a 25% corporate tax rate instead of a 28%, but preserve the offshore 20%. After that happens, the very next thing they're probably going to go after is a tax increase for individuals, not corporations. And it's very likely that they're going to push cryptocurrency regulation in that bill as a consumer protection package. Just like with infrastructure, they've rolled some parts of the Green New Deal in it. It's very likely that that's going to happen. Now, what is causing the urgency here? The NFT revolution, the rise and soon to be fall of Dogecoin, these types of things, and the DeFi push that's occurred. It's creating a perception of Ponzi-like trading behavior, where a copy of a copy of a copy can have a $5 billion valuation, where people overnight are becoming fabulously wealthy. And the only way they can realize that value, where many retail investors come in and purchase their tokens with the hope that the next group of people coming in will purchase their tokens for an even greater price. That's where our industry's at in many cases for many products, especially when we talk about products that are obvious copies of other products having high valuations. This is not normal for markets. There's an enormous amount of just craziness. Doge in particular, 94% of the supply is controlled by the top 1%. Every minute, over $4,000 worth of Doge is just printed out of thin air. I believe 2.2 billion per year. And permanently, it's persistent linear inflation. 10,000 tokens are produced every minute. There's no use and utility. There's no real development team. There's no vision, mission. There's no goal to go and do something over a 5 or 10 period. There's not this notion that people are buying a philosophy and they hope that that philosophy will be realized. It's really just, we're going to push it to $1 so we can all get rich. Well, tell me, who's in a better position to sell? The retail investor who's doing it on a cell phone app, or the insider who's well connected to the markets, who has a large position and can trickle sell it as it hits certain major market milestones? Whenever you see market patterns like that, what happens is the regulator gets involved because they feel they have a moral responsibility to get involved. If you doubt me, look what they did with GameStop and look what they've done with these other things. The reason they have yet to do so is because they're working systematically through. COVID relief was the first part of the agenda. Infrastructure is the next part of the agenda, and corporate tax reform. And the next thing will be personal tax reform. And because Georgia gave 2 senators to the Democrats, we're now in a position where they can run on party lines. And because there's that unity in the House for the Democratic Party, there's a very high possibility that these things will pass. The other thing is Gensler, as new chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, has a history of being very proactive with enforcement from his prior time, and I believe it was the CFTC. And he understands our industry exceedingly well. He taught a class at MIT about cryptocurrencies. So the SEC is in a position where they, through enforcement and through soon regulatory mandate, will be in a position to be much more active on enforcement towards things that they feel are wrong. It would not surprise me that DeFi is the very first target of that enforcement, along with FinCEN and other branches of the Treasury Department. Because if you look at the utility of these things, what they're actually doing, they are right now standing in place of regulated organs in the market. Now, this is not an endorsement of this behavior. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's going to help us all and it's good for retail investors and this is great. What I'm saying is this is rhetoric. This is history. This is how these markets tend to act. These are how these actors tend to act. The Republican Party has historically been a bit more hands-off and libertarian in the way that they view regulation. Say, let the free market do its thing, even if agency failures happen. The left has been a bit more, we can't trust the free market. It's not fair. It's not equitable, or evil capitalists are going to go and screw people. So we need to be hands-on and we need to regulate. Now, these are broad generalizations. The Democrats, for example, under Clinton, repealed Glass-Steagall. Okay. And there was a lot of financial regulation that occurred under Bush and under H.W. Bush and so forth. Okay. So these are broad generalizations, but in general, that's the direction things go. And this particular government has been very progressive and has progressive constituencies that they do listen to, such as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and so forth. And there's certainly a very strong demand within that wing of government to address perceived inequities, inequalities, or unfair behavior by the very wealthy against the very poor. If Elon Musk bought a few $1 million worth of Doge that's now worth $1 billion or $2 billion and is found to be dumping on poor people, kids who don't have a lot of money, you better believe that that will be the catalyst to bring in a regulator who has that kind of inequality mindset, that one of the world's wealthiest men manipulated a market so he could extract billions of dollars from the poor. Even if it didn't happen, the perception of such a thing happening or the beliefs that such a thing could happen is a justification for regulation with this particular political mindset, which does have at the moment a political monopoly. There's nothing that can be done to stop it. There's no filibuster. There's no counterparty. There's no other event. And the other party, to be frank, was not very pro-crypto. That was the party that brought us the Jay Claytons and the Stephen Mnuchin and so forth, who were not exactly the most pro-crypto around. And there were statements like Bitcoin is a bad deal amongst that administration. So it's just inconceivable to me that we're not going to see at least an attempt to pass legislation this year, which will contain a mandate about crypto. Now, on the pro side, this could potentially bring, for the first time in our industry's history in the United States, clarity, meaning asset classification, perhaps defining utility tokens, perhaps clearly defining securities law, perhaps clearly defining the roles and responsibilities of entities and how registration works and so forth. I don't believe for a moment that it's going to be very positive. I'm old enough to remember what happened with BitLicense. And I remember when the people pushing BitLicense reached out to us in industry and we all talked about it, and they did the exact opposite. And they created a situation where New York State is now one of the worst places in the United States to run a cryptocurrency business. And very few people can qualify for BitLicense and get through that entire process, despite having spent, in some cases, millions of dollars chasing it. The people who came up with that policy are now the same people who are kind of running the Treasury Department and follow that same philosophy. I just don't believe it. I could be wrong, and perhaps my skepticism is undeserved, but it is my belief regulation's coming. So, what does this mean for the industry as a whole, and in particular us, and how we approach things? We built Cardano in mind for having flexibility because the reality is global product, and we say it's a global financial operating system. Wherever you sit on the United States, you might not be from the United States. You might be from Canada or Germany or China or from an African nation like Senegal or Ethiopia. And it's impossible to build a protocol to fit the needs of all these different people. So the point is, you have an unregulated base layer that carries instead a philosophy, a monetary policy, a control philosophy, a way to update and grow. And then when you talk about activity, which could be classified as regulated activity, you create a toolbox for the people participating in that activity to escalate and be able to do that in a way that makes their government comfortable. This is why, in addition to constructing Cardano, we also worked on an identity management system, Prism. And we worked on the standards process, DIDS, and we built all kinds of cool things and designed this to scale and enable KYC and AML. So what does it mean? It's when you issue a DApp, when you create a transaction, at some point in the life cycle of Cardano, hopefully soon, you'll be able to integrate DIDs into that. And those DIDs, you can go to a KYC entity. It might be a bank or an exchange or an independent company like Acuant, and you'll be able to upgrade that DID to carry an identity with it that's verified and a regulator would be okay with. And you can encrypt it and store it privately. You can leave it decrypted and store it transparently. And you can use it to sign transactions, sign metadata payloads, sign addresses, and so forth. That is compositional. Once you have that capability, you can talk about regulated DeFi. For example, you can talk about a DEX where all funds that enter come from authenticated addresses or whitelisted addresses or so forth. In addition to that, we built our governance system to be flexible. So right now it's focusing on ADA and the evolution of Cardano. But if you create a native token and you issue that native token on Cardano, at some point in the life cycle, you'll be able to take that and have a voting system just like ADA has a voting system. So instead of trying to figure out how to build a DAO or decentralization, you get it right in day number one. And the holders of it can control the fate, evolution, and purpose of that. In addition to that, we built a metadata standard that's been live since December. And that metadata allows you to embed hashes representing contracts, representing commercial understandings, other such things, pointers to off-chain artifacts that can assist in the escalation of regulation. Again, I can't predict who you are, where you're using this. It's my job as an architect of a system and as a designer to kind of imagine a toolkit. Now, the one good thing from regulatory clarity is it gives me business, regulatory, and technical requirements for the future editions of Cardano. And it's my belief that we can find creative ways of complying with whatever is coming that can still potentially preserve privacy and potentially preserve autonomy. The worst case scenario would be the evolution of a system where everything is centralized and a regulated financial institution has to control your money and has to control your autonomy. I think this would be one of the most damaging and catastrophically terrible outcomes for our industry. And there is a chance that that could happen. And as we get closer to whatever proposed legislation comes, if it's clear that that legislation is being written in that direction, we will do everything in our power as a company to lobby against such things from happening and try to rally the industry to lobby against such things. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the entities in our industry have made, in many cases, billions to tens of billions of dollars in the last few years off of the markets, many entities in our industry spend exceedingly low amounts of money lobbying against bad legislation or trying to interface with regulators. Now, there are some exceptions to this that are noteworthy, but for the most part, it seems to be an activity that they're either not interested in or an activity they don't think is important, as if no one listens. Meanwhile, the industry we seek to replace, the legacy financial industry, has line items allocated billions of dollars every year for lobbying, campaign financing, uh, kind of backdoor stuff where these regulators, when they leave, they enter private industry and they end up working for these banks. For example, the current Secretary of the Treasury, I believe, received $7.1 million from industry after leaving the Federal Reserve System. So money talks. And if our industry underspends or undervalues lobbying and undervalues representing our industry's need and interests, we can only expect that the outcome is the only group of people that the politicians are going to listen to are the people who are spending. So in lieu of that, you, the people, if you're in the United States, can at least let your voices be heard. So I suspect legislation, when it comes, will not exactly its first instantiation be very favorable. And we'll probably publicly lobby and in many cases ask for your support to let your congressman, senator know that we think that this is counterproductive for innovation and counterproductive for our industry as a whole. But let's be clear here. This is not coming unprovoked, and this is not coming as just out of nowhere. There has been bad behavior in our industry. Market manipulation, unstable exchanges, lots of insider baseball, uh, things like Dogecoin massively appreciating. And in the NFT marketplaces, there's a lot of evidence that these are inside bidding, where basically people are bidding amongst themselves to inflate the prices or create assets with artificially high prices. This is behavior of an unregulated financial market. We saw this exact same stuff happen in the 19th century during the baronial age, and it led to the Knickerbocker crisis in 1907. And then because there wasn't a proper response, it led to another collapse in 1929, which led to the creation of the Securities Exchange Commission in 1933. And so the pendulum tends to swing too far in the other direction when it's too far in this direction. And it is my belief it is going to happen in that way. So the next 6 to 12 months are going to be a very interesting and they're going to be a little rocky in my view. And I do believe that regulation is coming, and I do believe clarity is coming, and assets are going to be viewed very differently in 2022, 2023. And it doesn't surprise me at all to see breaking news that something is being proposed. And unfortunately, because there's a political monopoly, there's no way to negotiate this if one party is aligned. So the best that we can do is build a better toolbox for compliance. And the best we can do is to try to lobby for this industry to continue thriving. I do believe that despite what America does, crypto is still going to be crypto. There's no greater example of that than what's happening with XRP at the moment. Despite the fact that Ripple is being sued by the Securities Exchange Commission for an unregistered security, the network is still running and billions of dollars of XRP are still trading, deals are still being made, and infrastructure is still being deployed. Ordinarily, when such an event happens, the entire ecosystem rolls up and collapses for fear of the custodial entity disappearing. But that has not occurred in that case. Now, Bitcoin is 10 times larger and has a 10 times larger ecosystem. So if very counterproductive negative regulation comes, that network is still going to function as it's written. All it means is my life as an American entrepreneur is made considerably more difficult. And my country is now left behind in one of the greatest innovations since the creation of the internet. And we'll just have to sit on the sidelines as a country and watch other countries exceed. This is one of the reasons, for example, why we're so committed to Africa, because as a whole, that continent is committed to change. Laws are changing, capital controls are coming down, legal systems are becoming more accommodating. And it's my belief that DeFi is the perfect solution for the continent of Africa. And the nations there are welcoming the innovations we're building with open arms. Nothing would break my heart more than having to offshore our entire fruits of our labors and draw a wall around the entire United States because very old people passed regulation to damage an industry that they don't understand very much about for the benefit of dying legacy actors And unfortunately, there is a chance that that could come as a consequence of a lack of foresight, investment, and political acumen on the leaders of our industry. So, for our part, we'll do what we can, but we're only one of many actors. I will continue making videos calling out bad behavior when I see it. There's a reason why ADA wasn't listed on certain exchanges for a very long time. It's because I directly confronted the leaders of those exchanges and said that them listing BitConnect and other things was immoral and wrong, amongst other things. And they took it personally and decided to take it out on an entire cryptocurrency and an entire ecosystem. But I still stand by those decisions because I just don't think it was right to endorse and enable liquidity for a Ponzi scheme. Analogously, I see many things today that deeply concern me in the NFT markets and the DeFi markets. And I think these are legitimate markets. And I think there's a lot of value that they produce. But I also think it's unrealistic for people who do very little work or copy a copy and bring very little innovation to a table to magically wake up and suddenly be worth billions of dollars. And those billions of dollars come from retail investors who have no clue what they're buying. They're just chasing avarice, believing that by buying it, they too will become millionaires. So this is just where we're at as an industry. And like all things, there's an up, there's a down, and we move on. The real players are here to stay. I don't for a moment believe Bitcoin is going to die. I have my grievances and umbrage with the mining protocol it uses, and I think it's an environmental catastrophe. And we as a company put our money where our mouth is. We spend millions of dollars every year in research and development trying to innovate our way out of such a regressive model. I don't for a minute think Ethereum is going to go away anytime soon, or any of these other entrenched actors. I think they'll be around in the next 5 or 10 years. And I believe they all bring a lot to the table in that respect. But I do believe that some of the excesses in the layer 2 and some of the excesses in the dApp space and some of the behaviors of leaders in key pieces of infrastructure have been counterproductive for the growth, success, promise, and optics of our industry. So that's all I got to say about this. I'll, of course, make more videos as more things materialize. But I figured I should just put a little asterisk on my Doge commentary. It's my most popular video I ever made, 167,000 views in under 3 days. Ratios are good, 11,000 upvotes versus a few hundred down. Some positive comments, some negative comments, but I think some people missed the point. It's not about a particular cryptocurrency going way, way up. It's about a cryptocurrency where 94% of the holdings are controlled by a very small group of people who have no incentive to hold it. And now that they've become fabulously wealthy, have the ability to dump and asking, well, who's buying and why they're buying? They're not buying a vision. They're buying a meme and a belief that they're going to get rich from that meme, that things are growing to the sky. And whenever you see that happen, when the bubble bursts, it creates a catastrophic amount of brand damage. Each and every person who loses money from something like that will have a negative perception, not just of Doge, but our industry as a whole. And some of them will demand a refund or will demand some form of retribution for what they perceive to be an ill. And if it is the case that a few billionaires on the inside were manipulating these markets for their own personal gain or bemusement, that's all that is required to pass dangerous and damaging regulations for our industry as a whole. And given that this is a commercial priority, it is a regulatory priority of the Biden administration, it's not exactly like they have to go out of their way. They just get a convenient excuse. And this is the same group of people that said, no, let no crisis go to a waste. And the same group of people that are perfectly comfortable with a great degree of government control and regulation over markets in general. That's just who they are. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it, but they were elected into office and they have a mandate to do these things if they so desire. So if our industry behaves badly or is perceiving to behave badly, and we see a lot of people not caring too much about the consequences of what they do, and a lot of people who really aren't well informed getting hurt It's just a recipe for disaster. Also, ask yourself about proper use of a cryptocurrency. You know, long time ago, when I created my course for Bitcoin or how I learned to stop worrying and love crypto, I went to great lengths to explain how to securely store Bitcoin yourself, back it up, make sure that you're not trusting it to an exchange, because at the time we had a lot of concerns with Mt. Gox, and we believed, the insiders in the industry, that they were insolvent, and it turned out that they were. The vast majority of people participating in these spikes are purchasing them and leaving them on exchanges, leaving them in cloud wallets, their cell phones. They don't really know how to use crypto, what to do with crypto, and they're only viewing it as an instrument for a vast appreciation. If that's the case, then what happens if one of these entities goes belly up? All these people lose their money. And they're, of course, going to blame crypto, not themselves, for that. So it always worries me when you have a huge surge of people with unrealistic expectations, irrational thinking, no domain knowledge or desire to acquire domain knowledge in our industry and use our stuff. And then those people are likely going to have a bad outcome. And then because they've had a bad outcome, people who seek power can use that as a symbol to gain that power and control and oversight. And they never really give it back. It takes a long time to undo damaging regulation. And in some cases, we've never been able to do that. For example, in the United States, the Patriot Act was passed right after September 11th, pitched as a temporary collection of measures to ensure that we could win the war on terrorism. 20 years later, all of the things in the Patriot Act have not only been preserved, but they've been enhanced and institutionalized even after the Snowden whistleblowing, showing you how pervasive things are. Financial regulation is no different in that respect. The minute that a new regulatory agency is constructed, the minute that a new standard is created, a corpus of law gets formed around it. Special interest groups form around it. Why is tax law so complicated? Because there's thousands of very well compensated tax attorneys. And anytime you try to simplify tax law, what you're inadvertently doing is putting them and H&R Block and the rest of these guys out of business. So they lobby against tax law being changed. Similarly, when regulations become more onerous and arcane, the incumbents like it because they already know how to comply, and it prevents startups from being able to enter their space. So it actually creates a regulatory barrier to entry. And then the accountants and the tax lawyers and these other people love it because they can make untold millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars helping businesses stay in compliance. And then the government likes it because they like power, they like control. Our whole industry was built by someone who was afraid of the government. Why? Because he stayed anonymous. Why? Because look at everything that happened before Bitcoin came out. Look at the Liberty Dollar. Look at all these other attempts to create private currencies. The people who created them went to jail. So it's a legitimate fear. It's a legitimate concern. And if people repeatedly publicly tell you what they think and what they're going to do, you don't hand them the ammunition to go and do it unless you want to. So just do understand that and understand where I come from, where the industry is at, what I've seen being a leader in this industry, dealing with other leaders in this industry, and unrealistic expectations. What makes me most sad, and why I say that my life's work in some way has been jaded by some of these events, is that I honestly do believe that the things that we do are going to change the world. I really do. It just makes sense to say that you can build so much into the protocol to protect people from themselves or future problems. Just the other day, I was having a meeting about NFTs, and a lot of artists, they care about a social cause. It could be clean water in Africa. It could be equal education for women in technology, whatever that particular cause is. Imagine if when you sell your art, every time the art is sold for the rest of time, 10% of that transaction gets donated to the cause that the artist cared about. Imagine that. Imagine if every time a Da Vinci painting got sold, there was some foundation that Da Vinci cared about and a cause Da Vinci cared about. Maybe it was gay rights or maybe it was rationalism, whatever it is. And that money would get donated. Imagine what that would do. The systems we're building are the first time in human history where that copyleft of royalties towards a social good could be preserved. And that's just Tuesday for us. It's a smart contract. It's just built into the protocol. The very same thing that can allow the automation of tax compliance can do the very same thing for royalties in the secondary market. And there's a billion other uses and utilities with one universal protocol. This truly is the financial stem cell. Instead, we're talking about a Shiba Inu. Instead, we're talking about when moon. Instead, we're talking about how we're all going to get rich and when Lambo, when this, when that. And that's the dialogue at the moment. This is the belief at the moment. Lumber is up 117% from last year. Why in God's name would you want to go accrue huge amounts of dollars? They're not going to be around much longer if we keep spending this way. Look at Europe. We're at negative interest rates. The world financial system is falling apart. Every major democracy is laden with gargantuan amounts of debt, in some cases over 200% of their GDP. I'm sorry, the world financial system is sick. If it was a human, it has cancer, and it may be terminal. It may be treatable. We don't know. And no one is honest. No one wants to admit that it's not good policy, that every time you want something, you don't have to make hard decisions. Instead, you just print money out of thin air, but yet inflation doesn't exist. And that carries into the behavior of the people. So the short-term avarice on the government side and short-term avarice on our ecosystem side, unfortunately, creates a reality where when we look at the real use cases and utility systems, truly fair marketplaces, truly transparent marketplaces, contracts that can't lie, contracts that give you a guarantee that you're treated fairly, regardless of your last name or the country you're born into. All of that takes second fiddle to where we would like to go as an industry. This is why I take these things so seriously. And this is why sometimes I have so much lament over what's happened. So, my belief, regulation is coming. It's my belief it's going to come this year. It's my belief it's going to be a big discussion, and that the industry as a whole hopefully will rally and get involved in these types of things. And I think that we'll find a way to get out of it, as we always do. And I don't believe any U.S. regulation will ultimately kill cryptocurrencies. I think cryptocurrencies are here to stay. And I think ultimately cryptocurrencies will be successful. The only thing I think bad regulation will do is harm my country and harm our economy, and not harm crypto in the long term. I also believe that some of the behavior that we are seeing in the NFT and in the DeFi space and in some of the infrastructure side is counterproductive to the industry's ability to actually deliver on its promises. And I do believe there are some bad actors in this industry. Some people think I'm a bad actor. They never exactly explain why or correlate why with what I've actually done and the accomplishments I have, but they certainly believe it. And I'll call out some of the people that I think are behaving badly and behavior that's badly, even if it's from a commercial viewpoint counterproductive. I gain nothing by calling out Elon Musk other than limiting my ability to work with his business empire. But I still think it's bad behavior. In the best case scenario, it's trolling people into doing something that's financially irresponsible. In a cynical worst case scenario, he could be actually taking their money. In either event, it's despicable. And again, I gain nothing by calling it out, and no one in our industry seems to have the courage to do so. But I have to do my conscience. I have to follow my conscience in that respect. So until next time, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you guys soon.